You're watching CCN, Clarksville Community Network, produced by Goodwin Productions. Powered by CDE Lightband.
Carl Wilson. I've been interested in photography for years. When I first started doing this, I was hung up on this. It had to be technically perfect. But I've gotten to where I actually like that sense of movement. They do an annual auction where they sell colts, mules. They sell horses, they sell horse colts. They sell ponies. These auctions are a social event for the Amish and the Mennonites. I mean, you can get hurt, you know. It's an adrenaline rush to me just to be there in the ring when they're doing that. Some say I am a photographer. I know I love it, and it gets better every year.
Somebody get 609, sold 500.
I was born in Russellville, Kentucky. We moved down here when I was just a kid, so I call Tennessee home. My grandfather loved photography, and we're going back to the 50s now. I was just a kid. He'd share stories and he'd share magazines with me, and I really followed it. About 66, I guess I bought my first real, what I would call a good camera. I went in the military. Went overseas, finally had enough money to buy a camera. I bought a nickel matte, kind of a precursor to the Nikons today. I was in the Air Force, and where I worked, we had a lab that we used for certain things. And when we weren't working, well, it was a perfect dark room. So me and the guy that really got me interested, we'd go in the dark room and develop film, at that time, slide film. Of course, over there, I was traveling and seeing things I'd never seen before, just an old boy from Tennessee. I'd get one of those carousels, loaded up with slides, and I'd encourage friends to come see what I had done. I often wondered if I bored them to tears with those slides. That's where I really got started with it. Of course, I worked for, 45 years helping raise a family and other things, so I didn't really have all the time to devote to it. I traveled with USDA for 10 years, from Georgia to Oklahoma to Texas, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama. I mean, I was all over the South, and of course I had my camera with me, so I'd see things that interested me. The whole time I was traveling and working, I'd always stop, and if I saw something I thought was good, I'd stop and take a picture. So that kind of kept my eye trained. 2018, I retired from the USDA, and I needed something to do, so I thought, well, now this is a perfect opportunity. My health is good. Here we are. I had heard about the Fairview produce auction. They auction produce 3 or 4 days a week during the season. And I got to know the fellow, he's Mennonite, the fellow that runs the auction. We got to be pretty good friends. He wanted to do some marketing. He said, would you do some work for me? I said, yeah, sure, I'll be glad to. So anyway, I was intrigued by the color. The peppers, I still see them, and I can't believe they're as beautiful. I mean, they really are. In the course of that, I met a fella who's now as good a friend as I have, a Mennonite fella who does the auctions. He's a mule guy, born and bred, I guess. I started going to some auctions with him and had the opportunity to film the Mennonites both at home and at the auction. I thought, you know, this color's just not working. I wanted to get something that would make you think of that time, because going up there and being with them, it's like stepping back in time. I mean, it really is. And I thought, you know, if I do some sepia tone prints, let's see what they looked like. And I really liked them, and people that have seen them like them. So now I'm comfortable enough with that family. They know I'm going to be respectful. They have rules. They have the ordnung, which each church has, that sort of lays out the rules for how they do things. And I've come to find that generally, if you'll ask them, I mean, either they'll tell you no or they'll say, yeah, it's okay. So I always try to ask ahead of time. I use a prime lens. I think it gives me more control. As long as I'm familiar with the lens, I'd prefer a prime lens. When I'm in the arena up close, I use a 35 millimeter. Well, basically 35 millimeters is fairly wide. When I get ready to do a print, the detail and the quality is generally better. It gives me some leeway to get what I want. I never know what I'm going to see. They have a pen back there. They bring the stock in there, and then as the number comes up, they let it out in the main arena. If you're back there in that pen, you got to really pay attention to what you're doing. Plus, I'm trying to get some pictures of the action, you know. My adrenaline level goes up because it's exciting. To me, it is anyway. And that stock is generally nervous anyway. They're out of their normal situation, especially when they let them out of the pen and they're trying to drive them up to the sale. You got to really watch them. There was over 500 animals in that fairly large arena, but I mean, it was packed. A lot of my work there is not locked down, I can tell you that. But I actually like that. I like to try to get a sense of movement. It's hard to do with a single frame. They were unloading stock at an auction early morning when they're bringing that stock in. I mean, that itself is a sight. That's another time where you got to watch where you are, because you can get run over. I took all the background out so we could sort of focus on the two faces. And I have the sense he didn't want his picture taken from the looks on his face. I like that picture. I think the horse has almost got the same look as the man. They work all year on the farm. They go to church. The kids go to school. They do this sale in the winter because it's kind of a slack time for them. They're not out in the field. They're not working. So it's a good time to have these sales. But they really don't have time to really socialize. And these auctions, if you'll watch at lunchtime, the families will start coming in there and they have a big discussion. They are social events as well as being a sale. There were people there from Canada. There were people there from the Dakotas, Minnesota. Most of the Mennonite communities are in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky. All those groups were represented at that sale. We had a little discussion the other day, Aiden and I did, about how many people were there. We finally sort of agreed that it was over 2,000. Generally, the ones sitting out in the crowd are there to buy, generally. I mean, some of them just like to watch the auction. That's the way they live, that's how they farm. That's their way of life. There's also some English who buy them because they like to have them. They just enjoy being around them. A lot of them are sold for work animals. So they know them. And they know the good ones and they know the ones that aren't so good. That's their livelihood. I mean, it's fascinating because it really is like stepping back in time. Jonathan Hoover, Aiden's son, he does not live as a Mennonite anymore. Now, he's at the house all the time, but I mean, they treat him just like everybody else. Jonathan does the auction and does the logistics of setting it up, and that's a pretty big job to do. He knows about Facebook, and he has started advertising. There are several mule pages. He does pretty good too. He uses his phone, but he takes pictures of some of the stock that's going to be at the sale. They had over 500 head of stock at that sale. They didn't get through the other night till 6:30. I mean, they started at 9. I mean, that's a long day, and Jonathan has to have some help. I don't know how his voice holds up like it does. They may go to 2 days. They run out of room, basically, is what it amounts to.
$2,000, man. Yeah, gonna be $2,000. We're gonna get to just $2,200 up high.
It goes back actually to the 1500s, Reformation time. Of course, the Reformation was the time that the Catholics and the folks separated from the Catholic Church. The Mennonites became a religion, an order, prior to the Amish. I mean, to look at them, generally, the Amish seem more conservative, and you would tend to think that they are an older order. But that's not always the case. It really depends on the church. The church has what they call the Ordnung, O-R-D-N-U-N-G. That's the rules on how they live. They're pretty strict. The Amish and the Mennonites do not believe in child baptism. They think that a person needs to have their own. They separated and sort of developed their own rules and way of living. People didn't like them because they were changing the order of things. So the Mennonites were the first ones to go to Holland. They were followed a few years later by the Amish group. I think it was sometime in the 1600s, there was immigration to the States. And the Mennonites were really one of the first groups to immigrate. They went to the general area in Pennsylvania, southeast Pennsylvania, and there's still a huge community there. My friend Aiden and his family and some of his relatives, they were actually up there until about 2006. It was getting too crowded. So they got to looking for another place that they could move to. They found Todd County and Christian County, Kentucky. And land prices were generally good, much cheaper than land in Pennsylvania. And they still continue to move. Typically Amish that have the full beards, they don't wear a mustache. Mennonites or Amish, they think it's vain. They don't grow their beard until they're married. Until they're married, they're clean shaven. Once they're married, then they start letting that beard grow, and it's like a vow. It's part of how they live. They speak English, they speak what they call Pennsylvania Deutsch. There's another language that some of the Amish speak, and I think it's related to Swiss because that's where some of them came from originally. The little kids, they don't speak English. They haven't taught them English. They still speak the Pennsylvania Dutch. And I know a few words, so I can talk to the kids a little bit. They go to school through the 8th grade. Once they start school, the schools start teaching them English. If you go in their house, they don't have a lot of stuff. They're pretty much basic. They have a large room that they live in. That's where the kitchen table is, where the wood stove is. They do have a sink. And then they'll have maybe a couch and a couple of chairs. I mean, that's basically it. They might have a wind-up clock. I had done some pictures of their grandchildren, and I did some 11 to 14s. And Jane, Aiden's wife, said, you know, we would rather have just 4x6s so we can put them in a book. A lot of the older family members, they don't have pictures of because I think they've gotten a little more liberal in that. And Aiden's told me several times that some of his aunts and uncles, they don't have any pictures to remember them by. When I find something that I think they want, I'll generally do them a 4x6 so they can put it in their book. That is an 8-horse team doing spring plowing on the farm adjacent to Aiden's. They have 5 or 6 sons. They all work there on the farm. It almost has a medieval look to it. That's what I see when I look at that picture. And if you think about it, plowing with horses goes back a long way. I call that one bringing in the sheaves. That's some of those boys that live next door to Aiden. They cut that wheat and then they bind it up in sheaves and then they go out there and bring it in. The next one there is one of the Martin boys. He's one of the older ones. They had pulled that wagon up where the threshing machine is. He was unloading those sheaves into the threshing machine, and then it would spit out the straw, and then they'd bag up the wheat. That wheat down there at the bottom, those are the sheaves that they brought in there on a wagon. Basically, they grow their own wheat. It was in June. The sun was up high. Look at his shirt. His shirt is soaked with sweat. It was hot out there. I get it hot too when I'm out there. It's really their decision on whether or not to stay with the church or to live a different life. But before they commit to the church, they have a period of time when they can sort of go out and explore the outside world. And I think it's generally their late teens to early 20s. And I can remember her leaving, and I think that's what it was. She had gone to Florida with some of her friends. She worked at the produce auction. That was about 2019. That's one of the first portraits that I did. I was generally pleased with the way it turned out. Their women live a hard life now. They do. Generally, when I go up there and get there at 8, there's washing hanging out all over that community. They have already done the laundry for the day. They have that house to maintain. They have the garden to maintain. They have the kids to look after. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 kids. I'm talking about 10 kids. This was at the Colt auction. The background is actually smoke. They were cooking hot dogs and hamburgers and all that. She's pregnant and holding that baby. I like that picture. Look at the way she's looking at that boy, and he's kind of standing there slump-shouldered. I imagine he'd gone to buy a Colt. When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. I like the idea of doing digital. Some people still prefer working in the dark room, and I get that, but I was just really intrigued with the digital side of it. So anyway, I've kind of made the switch as the technology's gotten better. Cameras are better, the equipments are better, computers are better. That is what I do now, it's digital work. I use Photoshop. I used it from early on, and I'm pretty familiar with it, so that's where I do my editing. I had a dark room for a long time, somewhere in the mid-'80s. We started getting personal computers, PCs, and I was intrigued with that. Well, it wasn't long, 2 or 3 or 4 years, I don't remember exactly. Ted Orland, who is a photographer from California, came to Austin Peay to teach a class in digital photography. I mean, this was really early on. We'd take some pictures and develop them and print them, and then we'd actually scan them and make what we thought at the time were pretty good prints. Ted actually gave us the freedom. I mean, we were all learning, including him, because it was 89 or 90 along in that period. I mean, that was really early in the computer world. Well, now, you've really got the juxtaposition here. He had just bought that horse at an auction and was leading that horse down the road. Jonathan also does a pumpkin auction in the fall. That's where I made that picture. I love his hand and the way his hand is on that rope. I mean, to me, that is just a picture of a working man. And that shadow across his eye, of course, it's from the brim of that hat. But to me, it's almost like he's got a mask on. Aiden's neighbor, Daniel Martin, I don't know how many horses he got, 8 or 10. That's one of them. I was over at his place one day, and that horse was looking me right square in the eye. And I like the way that turned out. That's a modern touch, isn't it? They were coming home from school. I mean, I think it sort of captures. One of my favorites, there were 2 stud horses, stud colts fighting. I had to try to get a picture of that. I was probably closer than I should have been, but I love that picture. I like it because I was able to get close. Look at the eyes. I mean, those eyes have a crazed look about them. I love that picture because it's just something that us English don't see every day. I didn't know how this would be received. When Frank asked me to put those pictures downstairs, I wasn't sure. But I've been so pleased at the response, not just because they're work that I've done, but just to show a little bit of what a life here, just up the road, is like. And I hope that I'm able to capture some of that in what y'all have seen. This is an ongoing project. I'm not through just because we put these pictures downstairs. I'm absolutely fascinated, especially in the world we live in today. I'm going to keep working on this. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. I mean, that to me just captures the life that they live. What better way to live than by God's promise to Noah in Genesis? Living by the cycle of the seasons, focused on faith, family, and community. The plain people, both Amish and Mennonite, live their lives apart from our world today.
For current and exclusive content, subscribe to CDE Lightband, connecting you at the speed of light.